Well, good afternoon, everyone. The time is 1 o'clock, and we wanted to go ahead and get started. Well, I want to first of all thank everyone for attending the first 2022 Local Partnership Program Guidelines Development Workshop. I'll go into, you can go to the next slide, Kayla. First, I want to welcome everyone. It's been about what? We were back in 2019 when we were programming the 2020 guidelines. And so here we are in 2021. And I just want to welcome everyone. I know there may be some familiar voices that I'll hear out there, but it's always good to hear some new voices out there too. So want to introduce the staff. So my name is Christine Gordon. I am the program manager for the Local Partnership Program. And I also want to introduce the very exciting LPP team. We have Anya Allenbacher. She is another one of the program managers with the Local Partnership Program. She focuses more directly with the formulaic program. And then we also have our analyst, which is Kayla Giese. She is kind of our mastermind behind the scenes. She gets it done. So want to thank them first and foremost. We also have our SB1 Programming Deputy Director on board with us today, Matthew Yozgad. He may be jumping in and out throughout the workshop. I may have him chime in on some topics. So thanks for being here, Matthew. And then I also want to give a special thank you for the CTC admin and the Local Streets and Roads team for helping us through this workshop today. So with that, I'm going to have Kayla go to the next slide, please. So Kayla's going to go over the kind of the webinar logistics, and then she's going to turn it back over to me.
Yes, so hi everyone, good afternoon. Our workshops are normally taking place in different locations around the state, as you know. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to the webinar format. Please bear with us if we encounter any technical difficulties. The workshop agenda is located under your handouts tab, most likely on the right side of your screen. You can download and save the agenda there, or you can see the agenda on our commission website. For participants joining us through the GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right hand of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handout tabs. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if you do not enter the audio PIN, you will remain in listen-only mode and you will not be able to speak if you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as a part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are two options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks, and please use the raise hand feature as early on into a topic as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic that you're commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read your comment for you. Unfortunately, no one will be able to be on camera while making comments. And that's it for our webinar logistics. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate your feedback and your time today.
Thanks, Kayla. Next slide. So I know that there may be some attendees on here that may not have been able to review the agenda that we'll be going over today. It is on our commission's website, and also if you at any time want to have a copy of that, please reach out and put in the chat box and we can see if we can get you the link to the agenda that we'll be going over today. So I wanted to briefly go over the agenda review today. So I provided a list of the things that we'll be discussing. We'll talk about the program objectives and the current 2020 cycle overview. We'll talk about kind of the lessons learned from previous cycles. We'll dive into a couple of some topics, looking at the previous cycle, cycle 1, cycle 2, and then looking at the 2018 program and then the 2020 program in terms of the guidelines. We'll also be looking at the proposed 2022 program schedule. We'll be going over some of the general guideline changes that we are proposing. We'll talk about our discussion workshop format and structures and how we're going to be structuring these workshops for the 2022 discussions. We'll talk about some key topics for subsequent workshops, and then we'll be wrapping it up with closing and next steps. And anytime during the workshops, if there are questions or if there are comments that as we're going through the topics, please feel free, as Kayla said, to either enter it in the chat box or raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can make your comments or questions verbally. So just before we get started, wanted to kind of talk about the objective of these workshops. These workshops are to discuss the key focus areas to receive feedback from stakeholders to move forward in the guidelines development process for the next cycle. These workshops are part of a public process to allow stakeholders the opportunity to provide feedback on program concerns. Minimal feedback received may impact the guideline development, which may have minimal changes to current program policies. If feedback is not given, we will assume that the stakeholders have no issues with the current guidelines. These guidelines should be consistent with the intent of the program, which is to balance the need to direct increased revenue to the state's highest transportation needs while fairly distributing the economic impact of increased funding. So I wanted to basically kind of go over the local partnership program objectives. So Kayla, can you go to the next slide? So I know there are a couple of attendees that may be new to the local partnership program. We do have stakeholders that have been with us since the establishment, since it was created. And so I just wanted to briefly go over the program objectives. So the program objectives is to basically provide funding to the county, cities, districts, and the regional transportation agencies that have passed voter-approved taxes, tolls, or fees that are dedicated solely to transportation improvements, or that have imposed fees, including uniform developer fees that are dedicated solely to transportation improvements. And you'll see more of a detailed listing or outline in the guidelines that talks about the program objectives. So next slide, Kayla. So now I'll talk about the current 2020 program. So the current 2020 program, which with the local partnership program, the program is funded 200 million per year. The 2020 cycle, which was adopted in December of 2020, we have 3 years of programming. So it was fiscal year 2021, 21-22, and 22-23. And so the total funding that was available for the 2020 cycle was 600 million. For this cycle, the program distribution was a 60-40 split. Our previous cycle, which was the 2018, was a 50% formulaic, 50% competitive. And so with the 2020 cycle, there was also an incentive set aside of 20 million. So this kind of gives you a snapshot of the funding that was available for both of the programs and the set aside for each of those fiscal years. So the next, and for the 2022 cycle, in the guidelines, it basically mentions that we, the structure that we're looking at is proposing the current program distribution that we currently have for the 2020 cycle. So carrying over this structure, which would be the 60-40 split with the incentive set aside for the 2022 cycle. Next slide, Kayla. So this slide, really, we're going to start going into the lessons learned from the previous programming cycle. Next slide, Kayla. So I wanted to kind of give you a snapshot of the programming cycle years, and you'll notice that the with the 2018 program, the formulaic cycle was a 2-year cycle. The competitive was a 3-year cycle. So the 2018 program, it covered, for the formulaic, covered 2 years, which was the 200 million, and then the competitive was the 3 years, which was the 300 million. For the 2019 program, the 2019 program reverted back to what was initially in the 2018 program guidelines, which was a 1-year cycle. And so that was a 100 million program for the cycle 2 of the formulaic program. For the 2020 program, both the formulaic and the competitive was for 3 years, which covered the 2020, 2021 through the 2022-2023 cycle, which was for the 600 million. And so I wanted to kind of stop there to talk about kind of some lessons learned. Wanted to reach out to the audience to find out what basically worked well in the structure of the programming cycles, what didn't work well, and are there any comments or thoughts in us moving forward into the next 2022 programming cycle. And with the current guidelines, which says that we would be looking at a 2-year cycle for both the formulaic and the competitive, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what lessons did we learn from these programming cycle years that were set up for these programs. So I'm going to turn it over to see if we have any comments, any questions that have come in. So Kayla, are there any questions that have come in?
Hi, Christine. No, we don't have any questions quite yet. I'm not seeing any raised hands, but maybe we just need to give a minute.
Okay.
I will let everyone know we did get a question regarding the presentation being available afterwards, and we will make it available more than likely through our website. So just everybody knows that to be on the lookout afterwards.
Yeah, so actually the presentation, and I'll go over a little bit of that when we talk about the workshop format and the structures, about the information that will be posted after each workshop. So we'll go a little bit more in detail about that.
I'm still not seeing any questions come through or raised hands, so maybe we can move on and check in a little bit.
Okay, and if there's any questions, if anything comes to mind, please do not hesitate to reach out, send us a chat through the chat, or raise your hand. And I think I see, is there a hand raised?
Yes, looks like there's a hand raised.
Okay.
Yes. Well, we had Adrian Cardoso. Adrian, were you looking to make a comment or question at this time? Looks like Adrian lowered their hand.
Okay.
Okay, we'll come back.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Actually,
Okay.
Christine, Adrian has re-raised his hand. We have, so Adrian, you're free to make your comment.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you, Adrian. Hi, Adrian.
Hi. So are you open then to doing a different period of time for this cycle? I think I'm just wondering how it's going to work with I always kind of wonder how it's going to work with the STEP, where the new years I think are 25, 26, 26, 27, which would be outside of the time frame that you're looking at. As I understand it, you would be looking to do a 2-year cycle, which would, I'm assuming, be 23, 24, 24, 25. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
So then, correct. Okay, because the new funding that we can program to new projects in the STIP is in 25, 26, 26, 27. Okay. So it might be good to reach it out into at least 25, 26 so that you know, I imagine some folks that may be applying for LPP funds, you know, may also be cobbling funding together and using STIP to help, you know, build the entire project. So I don't know if that's something that you would consider, or if it was just, you know, there were so many problems with having a 3-year cycle the last time.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and
I guess I would propose that potentially, I think we would prefer to see a 3-year cycle for that reason.
Okay, yeah, so that's good to hear, Adrian. Thank you for that, because I think as we start getting into our workshops, those are some of the things that we will be talking about. Like I said, when we were developing the workshops in 2020, the consensus was that we would look at possibly a 2-year cycle, but we are always open to having those discussions in our subsequent workshops. So yes, we will have that on as one of our topics. So thank you,
All right,
Adrienne.
thank you. Okay, bye.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
None on my end, Christine. Justin, I'm not seeing any. Are you seeing any?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, like again, if you do have any questions, do not hesitate to chat, send it in the chat, or raise your hand, and we will unmute you. So the next slide, Kayla, can you go to the next slide? So the next area I wanted to talk about is the program schedule. So here I kind of broke it down so you can kind of look at it visually as to what was the schedule for the 2018 program, the 2019 program, and then the 2020 program. And you can see the duration of the time that the guidelines were adopted, the call for projects immediately after, up until the program adoption. And so in looking at the 2018 and the 2020 for the competitive, it looks as though the duration for the 2018 was about 7 months. And then we look at the 2020 program, which was 9 months. The formulaic was a little bit shorter for the 2018 and the 2019, but we stayed with the same kind of track with the formulaic and the competitive for the 2020. So in looking at the 2022 program, I wanted to get some feedback from the stakeholders. What kind of went well with the stakeholders in terms of the duration, in terms of the call for projects, the applications that were due, and then the program adoptions, and did it work well for the agency, the applicants? What didn't work well? And again, are there any comments or thoughts on the program schedule and looking forward for the 2022 program? So I'm gonna put it back out to the audience for any comments or suggestions. Do we have any comments, Kayla, that are coming through?
Nothing written in, and I'm not seeing any hands raised quite yet.
Okay. Are there any questions that are coming through the question panel?
No, none in particular for the topic.
Okay. So again, this is something to kind of give you a visual of the previous cycles, and then going into the 2022 program. If these are topics, or these are things that you'd like to discuss in the workshops, that we would love to hear about the comments that will come forward in the workshops. Okay, so if you can go to the next slide, Kayla. The next area that I wanted to talk about is the guideline interpretations. So in the 2018 program, wanted to look at, so for the 2018 guidelines, those guidelines were basically modeled after the Prop 1B state local partnership program. There were some additions to it, such as the incentive funding, but then there were some revised policies, such as the program distribution and the reporting, which kind of followed the accountability, the SB1 accountability and transparency guidelines, which went more in depth of the reporting for the program and the projects. In the 2020 program, we tried to look more into kind of the formatting of the structure of the guidelines, trying to revise some clarified policy language in terms of the program distribution, the set aside of the incentive funding, the evaluation criteria, and the match requirements. And then we also, in the 2020 guidelines, we looked at, you know, was the structure that was in the 2018 where you've seen the formulaic and the competitive combined, we kind of looked at it. So in the 2020, it's still together, but we kind of separated it to try to clarify a little bit more about the policies for the formulaic program and the competitive program. So in looking at the different areas, we wanted to see in terms of formatting, clarity of the language. As an example, eligibility. Did we clarify it to where agencies that were new to the program were able to understand the eligibility and the documents that are needed and the verification of the eligibility? And are there other areas in the guidelines that you felt that the interpretation may have been a little clearer? And so I wanted, again, to open this up to the audience to kind of give us your feedback on kind of what went well, what you've seen we could go back and look at, and the discussions that we can have in future workshops in terms of the interpretation of the guidelines. So I'm going to open that up. So do we have any questions or any comments in that area?
Hi, Christine. So we do have a couple of comments that were written in so far. So they're from Don Batiste, and first they said the 3 months at least between guideline adoption and applications being due is helpful so agencies can get to their boards or committees for approval to submit. Some larger cities still have issues scheduling items quickly on their board agendas.
Okay.
They also asked, can the CTC consider previous local money investment as a match in the next set of guidance? It would be helpful if agencies could get credit for their investment in the project prior to the adoption of the program.
Okay, that's a good comment. Thank you for that comment. And actually, one of the topics, and we'll go over a little bit later in the workshop, but one of the topics that we will be talking about in the subsequent workshops is matching requirements and how we are going to look at matching requirements. Do we look at what we currently have in the guidelines? I know with the 2018 program, there was a one-to-one match. There was 25% if the agency generated less than 100,000, in revenue. The 2020 program, we looked at sound wall only projects and looking at their pre-construction expenditures. And so those are things that we want to discuss further in depth, to talk about the match requirements and really hear from the stakeholders, from the applicants, as to their take on or their input on match requirements. So that is one of the topics that we will be discussing.
Okay, we have one more written question, and then it looks like we do have a hand raised, so I'll turn it to Justin in just a second. So
Okay.
This one is from Nicole Chang. This is Nicole, a policy assistant with Climate Plan. The eligibility criteria was very clear, as I am new to this guidance process. I am wondering if I'm so sorry, I just lost my place on the screen. Okay, I am wondering if we could limit the eligibility of general highway expansion to align with the CAPTI framework. I look forward to working on this.
Okay, and that so keep in mind that the those types of discussions we can bring up in our subsequent workshops. The local partnership is a little different than the other programs in terms of the statute that's set for the program. But those are discussions that we can have. But again, keeping in mind the statute and the intent of this program, and also the fact that this program is broken up into two components, the formulaic and the competitive. So having those discussions and kind of looking to see how that would impact those programs, we can have those discussions. So thank you for that comment.
Christine, we have one more written question before I turn it to Justin. This is from Shelly Kwan. This is Shelly from LA Metro. It would be helpful to have more clarity around project savings, particularly for LPP formulaic funds. Here is detail. It should be made clear that the project savings are also subject to the timely use of funds deadline associated with the phase they originate from. For example, construction must be completed within 36 months of contract award. Sponsor needs to reprogram the construction savings before those 36 months are up.
Thank you, Shelley. Yes, that is actually one of our topics that we will be discussing in our workshops. We've seen the challenges that we're starting to see those projects coming in that are realizing those cost savings, and especially it really pertaining to the formulaic program funding. And so those are the discussions that we will be having in our workshops. So thank you for bringing that up, Shelley. And Anya, I believe, will be covering some of that, but then we will also talk about those in future workshops. So thank you so much for that.
That's it for written questions right now, so I'll turn it to Justin to take care of some raised hands that we have.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kayla. I see two attendees at this time with their hand raised. Up first, we have Jose Luis Caceres. You are free to comment.
Yes. Hi, Christine. Jose Luis Caceres here at SACOG. I just wanted to say I don't actually have much to add here, but it's been, a couple of years since reading the last guidelines and participating in this. I represent SACOG, and we have a big county that's a self-help county. And if I knew some of these kind of more specific questions in advance, like maybe for the next workshops, I can get you more specific answers when I talk to the various sponsors. And maybe they'll remember 2 years ago the guidelines, but generally the feeling I got was it was our third time doing it last time, and the guidelines had changed a little bit, but it seemed like our sponsors were falling in line with the rhythm, the eligibility, the flow of it. And I generally heard a lot of kind of a lot of sounds of satisfaction from our self-help county and from those that competed. But I didn't take this specific question back. So I guess my feedback is I appreciate the agenda, but if you already know what your questions might be, just drop them in, and then I'll take those and go get some better answers for next workshop.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you, Jose Luis. We'll make sure that we get those out to you. And again, we will be again posting this, and then we will have those questions that we'll try to send out prior to maybe our next before our next workshop, and maybe we can talk about those, because we'll have like a recap of the previous workshop, and so maybe we can set some time out to talk about those questions and get those questions answered and discuss those. So yes, we will be doing that.
Yes, I like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have one more attendee with their hand raised at this time. Up next, we have Grecia Elenis. Grecia, you're now free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Great. Hopefully y'all can hear me okay. My name is Grecia Elenis. I work for a local nonprofit called Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Very briefly, I do want to echo I think Jose's comments before me on getting the questions advanced. It would have been really helpful, because I think it's, I actually pulled up the guidelines. So I was like, okay, let me just kind of skim them really quickly and kind of jog my memory. But one initial thing that as I was skimming that really jumped at me that I think I remembered from last time is the screening criteria section, where it's asking projects to, for instance, demonstrate negative environmental / community impacts. And so I think a comment there is just raising that bar, and instead of just hey, making sure that they don't impact them negatively, let's proactively create, like, let's support projects that only proactively, benefit the communities through, and I think it's noted throughout the guidelines, hey, they should be community-driven projects. You should show how you're engaging the community and nonprofits. A comment on that end is like providing, and I can't remember if this is in the guidelines, I didn't skim it on entirely, but providing very concrete examples of what that looks like, of what do you mean and what do you expect from jurisdictions when they are submitting, this support from the community. So whether it's like handwritten letters, a petition that residents in a neighborhood sign. I think those examples really go a long way, especially with jurisdictions who are under-resourced and understaffed and just kept like head underwater and trying to figure out like, what can I do, would be really helpful. And my last comment is just really also echoing Nicole's comment from earlier from Climate Plan around just, I understand, the limitations in statute. So, how do we like from the capacity that you do have and what you can do, how do we work around that? Because I think it is integral that we center the CAPTAI, not just in LPP, but just across the board in anything that we do, just because I think that document is moving us forward in the direction that we do need to be going, especially as it within CTC, Caltrans, and all these transportation investments. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. Yes, that is something that we're hearing the voices, and those are things that we'll be looking at, and I'll talk a little bit more about kind of the areas in terms of the local partnership program, in terms of equity, in terms of community engagement, and looking at how do we expand in our sections in the competitive program. In terms of what we're really looking for, what documents we're looking for. And so I think that's something that we'll be talking about more in depth as we proceed into our workshops. So thank you for those comments. And we know that, CAPTAI, it's here, and so how can we, best align, especially with the local partnership program, because again, I'll, say this later, but because LPP is really not specific to the strategies, we really want to make sure that we are looking in some of the strategies that we do in terms of the community engagement, in terms of the equity, and how we're tying that into our guidelines. So thank you so much for those comments. Do we have any other questions or comments before we move on to the next area?
Hi, Christine. Yes, we do have one more attendee with their hand raised at this time.
Okay.
Up next, we have Jesse Gotham. Jesse, you are now unmuted and free to make a comment.
Yeah, just a point of clarification I know has come up on the types of funds that can be used as match, if we can use other programs as complementary funds to the LPP funds. Just, I think it states in there that ATP funds cannot be used as match for the LPP program, but just any other clarification along those lines, whether they be federal funds or the types of funds that are eligible for match, I think it might be helpful to clarify that.
Okay, so you are looking at us clarifying it more in the match, is what is determined match required for match.
Yeah, what can be used as complementary funds? Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you for that comment.
Okay, Christine, I do not see any other attendees with their hand raised at this time.
Okay, all right, well, thank you for the comments that we did receive. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide, Kayla. So the next slide gives you kind of a breakdown in terms of the evaluation criteria. And you'll see in the 2018 program, there were a list of evaluation criterions that were used, and those were basically kind of mirrored or modeled after the Prop 1B State Local Partnership Program. In the 2020 program, we went a little step further. We kind of tried to clarify it a little bit more, expanded a little bit more in these areas. And then we also added safety, system preservation, and the regional and local transportation, land use and housing, where we kind of tied a little bit of the housing from the community development resources in terms of the criterions. And so wanted to let everyone know that in the 2022 program, we will be looking at expanding these further. And so those are the discussions that we'll be having. Wanted to, again, kind of reach out and have some questions or comments in terms of the evaluation criteria that we used for the 2020 and the 2018. I know that I'll specifically talk about the system preservation. So when we were having the guideline development, there was an express need from the small rural agencies, which talked about the system preservations and looking at road rehabilitations. And so we, heard that feedback, and we included that criteria. And so moving forward into the 2022 program, we will be looking at these current criteria. Do we need to expand in these? And we'll talk about it later. How do we incorporate equity and the community engagement, and what documents are we going to be looking at? Are we looking at, how the community was involved from the beginning to the thought of the project up until the project was completed, and even after? So what are we really looking for? And I think going into the 2022 program, we really are going to have those in-depth discussions so we can understand what can be provided, what should we be looking at, and making sure that we're getting meaningful community engagement demonstrations in these projects. So that's where we'll be headed in the next program. So just kind of want to stop there and see if there are any comments, any feedback that you'd like to share in terms of our evaluation criteria, looking back at the last two programs.
Not seeing any yet, Christine, but maybe we need to just give it a minute.
Yeah.
Nothing coming in for written questions, and I'm not seeing any raised hands right now.
Okay, so if we do, we can always kind of circle back to that one. Okay, so thank you all. So the next one I wanted to talk about is the project delivery and reporting. So as I mentioned earlier, if you go to the next slide, Kayla, I'm sorry. So I just wanted to kind of talk about the areas in terms of project delivery and reporting, in terms of the project amendments, the project progress reports, completion and final delivery reports, and then the audits of the project expenditures and outcomes. So in the 2018 program, which again was modeled after the state local partnership program, this area was basically modeled in terms of the reporting and the project delivery, and it was revised to include the accountability and transparency guidelines. The 2020 was similar to the 2018 program, but we tried to revise and clarify the amendment process. So if you see in the 2020 program guidelines, we tried to expand the actual process specifically with the formulaic program projects in terms of the project amendments. We also talk about project scope for the formulaic projects, and I'm going to talk about more so about the project, the formulaic program projects. And before I open it up for questions, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the lessons learned or what we've seen since from cycle 1 to cycle 3. So what we're starting to see now is those projects that are coming forward in terms of the formulaic projects, they're nearing the completion or they've completed. So now we are getting into the completion and the final delivery project reports. And so they're projects that they came in with a scope, and at the time they were completed, the scope has changed, and there were no coordination or communication in terms of the project scope change. And we just want to open this up to kind of talk a little bit about it. How do we improve in that area? Because we know that the formulaic program projects, they are not required to provide project progress reports throughout the project. They're not required to provide project reports for the semi-annual reports like the competitive program projects are. And so how do we improve in that in going forward into the 2022 program? So those are some things that we want to talk about in terms of really providing the projects that were initially submitted, in terms of the scope, in terms of the expectations and the outcomes. We are really looking at the outputs and the outcomes for not only the competitive projects, but also the formulaic projects. So how can we work together to ensure that these projects are meeting, meeting the intent of providing the scope that was initially set forth, and providing those benefits, and what was really done with the money that the project was funded for, and the outcomes, and are those benefits being realized in terms of, because we are seeing some of the projects that are being audited. And so I'm not sure if anyone remembers, but in our previous CTC meeting, the Inspector General presented some information, and their plans for 2022 is basically looking at some of these local partnership program projects, and some of the projects that they're really looking at are these completed projects, and the completed projects for the local partnership primarily are coming from the formulaic program. So just keeping in mind that and how we move forward in the next cycle, really providing that information when it comes time to completing these projects and your final report. So I just want to kind of put that out there. I want to open it up for any questions that any of the attendees have pertaining to this. Do we have any questions, Kayla or Justin?
No written questions right now, and I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Okay. And then, so I just want to also mention that this may be one of the areas that we also talk about in our subsequent workshops. We may go a little bit in depth in it, and how do we move forward in delivering and reporting on these formulaic program projects. So Kayla, can you go to the next slide? So I just wanted to open this time up to any other areas that the attendees feel that I didn't cover, where we want to talk about the lessons learned. We did have some comments in other areas, and I thank you for those comments. Are there any other questions or comments regarding lessons learned before we move forward?
Nothing right now, Christine.
Okay, so our next slide is our questions and comments period. So opening it up at this time to kind of take a breath to see if there are any other questions that you've kind of digested a little bit over. It's probably a lot of information that you just received. So are there any questions or comments that you want to kind of throw out before we move forward? And again, if there anything that comes up, we can always kind of address those at that time. So I'll wait a few seconds before I move on to see if we do have anything that comes forward.
Still no questions. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, there's a couple of hands raised now, so I'll turn it over to Justin.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, up first we have Jesse Gothen. You're now unmuted and free to make your comment.
Hi, Christine. Just quickly a comment. Our agency has come in for some time extensions related to our projects that require Public Utility Commission and UPRR, Pacific railroad coordination. And I'm wondering if there may be an effort afoot at the CTC level, at the state level, to help agencies get better cooperation from the railroad. I just know a number of our projects are going through either scope revisions or asking for time extensions. It comes back to the same issue. So that's just a comment in terms of, I'm curious if other agencies are faced with the same problems, because railroad tracks are significant barriers through agencies, and often ones we want to overcome with better bike facilities, etc. But this is a continuing reoccurring theme on our projects, and I've often wondered if there was some effort at the CTC level to help with the PUC or something along that line. So that's just a comment to consider.
Thank you so much for that comment. And yes, I believe, so what I'll do is I'll go back and share that with the team and the management, because I believe there has been some, some kind of coordination that they're looking at in terms of, because as I recall, a couple of projects that have experienced the same kind of issues that you're having in terms of coordinating with these agencies. And so, yes, that's something that we'll take back, and we will bring forward kind of a discussion in our next workshop to kind of talk about that and what's being done to look at the coordinating efforts with those agencies. So thank you so much for that comment.
All right, Christine, we have a couple more attendees with their hands raised at this time. Up next, we have Gracia Alanis. You are free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hi, so I have a general comment and the question as far as timeline. The general comment is just kind of really focusing on how is it that, LPP and other programs, again, can really center equity into what projects are being funded, and ensuring and really encouraging to the extent possible those types of projects that center communities that have had the highest development, and working with jurisdictions to work with those communities, and then especially in like for the competitive dollars, again, leveling the playing field and working with under-resourced communities and jurisdictions that just don't have the capacity to competitively apply, and so like thinking through that aspect, and then I think just the general comment around the cost effectiveness of programs is just again, really focusing on the equity aspect of it is like thinking through again for especially I'm thinking of unincorporated communities that need the basic services of like drain, gutters, like kind of where it's very costly. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and I think from my perspective, you may not think of this as like, hey, this is not cost effective, but we are addressing these systemic issues of communities that have not had this type of investment. So like, yes, you won't get the biggest bang for your buck in some of these projects, but this is where like the focus and the emphasis should be on like addressing these inequities in our systems, and trying to bring like level out those barriers and level the playing field and breaking down those barriers. And then just a general, as far as like the general question around the timeline. So yeah, I guess as far as like getting comments in, when draft guidelines will be released, et cetera, is that public knowledge yet?
No, so we're going to go briefly over our timeline for the program, and we'll talk about in terms of comments that are that will be provided or be provided throughout the process, and how we are going to treat those comments and bringing forward because what we do is we bring a draft of the guidelines forward to the commissioners, and then but throughout this process we look at the comments. So comments can be either sent through our email directly to staff, So we do look at the comments and feedback that we do receive. In terms of the equity and basically how it kind of ties into the projects in terms of the competitive program or the local partnership program in general, I thank you for those comments. That is something that, again, that we will be talking more in depth about in terms of how do we incorporate equity? What does it look like? I mean, what are we looking at? And I'm glad that, you know, that some of the applicants are on the line, because that's just something that we will be kind of having those discussions to understand better. What are we really looking at? How is that going to be incorporated into our selection of the projects and in terms of our competitive projects? So thank you for that comment. So yes, we will be looking at that. And so yes, if you do have questions or comments, please send those our way, and we'll talk about where to send those. And then Anya is going to talk about the timeline and the schedule for the program and the guidelines. Do we have any more questions or hand? I think I see some hands raised. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So we have a couple more attendees with their hand raised. I know we also received one written comment. Up next, we have Luis Z. Luis, you're free to unmute yourself, make a comment.
Hi, this is Luis Zhao from the Orange County Transportation Authority. Hi, Christine.
Hi.
So I did have one question or comment, maybe a comment per se, on what we would probably revisit in the guideline development process, because we've had some projects that are, I wouldn't say conventional construction projects, but they have run into some project delivery issues, primarily because they're longer term projects. Traditionally, we have to deliver projects within 36 months, but there are projects out there, for example, electronic real-time signage for our bus stops or signal projects that do have a performance period after they're delivered. So after we install something, so that's something that I think maybe we should either clarify in the guidelines as something that's eligible, because these do have meaningful benefits that are given to our community. At the same time, maybe revisiting some of the eligible expenses and making sure that we're capturing as best we can everything that should be eligible for a project. So hopefully that's helpful, but I'd be more than happy to maybe have a conversation with you and the commission about it, and even talk about it during our workshops.
Yeah, let's have a discussion, Louis, on that. And then yes, we can have, like I said, a more in-depth discussion when we talk about the kind of the timely use of funds and delivering these projects and what it looks like and what are the challenges that the agencies are having. So yeah, I'd like to have a further discussion with you on that, Louis.
All right, Christine, we have one more attendee that I see with their hand raised at this time. Up next, we have Julia Randolph.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, Julia Randolph with the Coalition for Clean Air. I just wanted to echo some of the comments made by Nicole with Climate Plan and Gracia with Leadership Council around CAPDI, but also you know, understanding that there are certain statutes in place, especially around these programs, and that you can't prohibit certain types of projects, but, you know, recommending that, you know, it's possible to like weigh things, certain criteria higher than others, such as climate equity and public health, to encourage more CAPDI focused projects, while still allowing those other types of projects to be eligible. So, you know, while giving incentivizing people to apply these CAPDI related projects. And also to follow up on the equity part, we understand that you're waiting for the Caltrans equity index tools, I think is what it's called. But, you know, I think in the meantime, it would be great to discuss something that we could still put into the cycle that's widely accepted, that we don't have to, you know, restart from the beginning like Cal EnviroScreen or something into at least this cycle. You know, we are happy to work with you all on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Yes. So, and I believe that, I think Matthew and, so I believe we're looking at the time, the kinds of like metrics or performance metrics that ties into equity. We're looking at that and how can we incorporate that into our guidelines. So we are looking, that's something that we're looking at. And so we're working together to coordinate these because they're not only with the local partnership, but there are other, the funding programs, which, they will have their workshops as well, but we will, and I see Matthew came off of it. So yeah, so we are looking at that, but I'll let Matthew kind of chime in to explain a little bit further when it comes to CAPTI and how it's going to be tied into our guidelines.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. And Julia, thanks for your comment. I'm not gonna, I think Christine actually hit on how CAPTI might play into the local partnership program pretty well, but in particular, the question you had or the comment you had around not waiting until Caltrans Equity Index tool is developed for us to integrate equity and how projects are providing equitable outcomes within the communities that they're originated. That is absolutely something that will be integrated into the competitive programs this current cycle. We're working with Laura Pennybaker's team here at the commission, so Sequoia Erasmus and Bridget Driller, as well as with some folks at Caltrans who are going to work with us to identify maybe a link to getting to the equity index tool in maybe a subsequent cycle. So it is certainly something that is being discussed in this cycle and integrated. Regarding some of the other metrics, I think you brought up in your comment, Julia, Hannah Walter has been working on quite an elaborate performance metrics guidebook, which we're not going, like, I don't know if Christina is going to kind of introduce that today. Okay, she's shaking her head, she's not. This is going to be a tool that we'll make available to applicants for all three of the SB1 competitive programs. And Hannah will actually be providing more of an overview on the guidebook and the metrics that you find within it, as well as some, I think we're referring to them as like developing areas or developing metrics that maybe they're not easily quantified or quantifiable, I should say. But information we're looking to capture through qualitative means. And so climate change adaptation, accessibility, equity would fall into that one, even though we're going to take a much closer look at how equity can play into our programs. These are all concepts that we're addressing this cycle. And I wanted to make that clear because I was hoping we made that clear in our kickoff workshop, and maybe we did, maybe we didn't, but I just want to reassert that's something that we'll be endeavoring in local partnership, congested corridors, and trade corridors this cycle. So thanks, Christine. Didn't want to steal too much time from you.
No, thanks, Matthew. And I think I want to also add the fact that, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in our workshop structure, because I think that these are areas that we really need to spend some time with before we, to really have those discussions. And I want to make sure that these are, meaningful discussions and that we're really able to share our concepts and ideas with the stakeholders. So when we talk about the workshop structures and how we're moving forward, I really feel as though the stakeholders will really sense the fact that we really want to, we want to really dedicate time to really focus on these areas because they're very important. And we don't want to ever feel as though we are kind of overlooking anything. We want to make sure we're really looking at this before we start really developing these. So I want to, and we'll talk about, again, like I said, we'll talk about it when we talk about the workshop structure, but just focusing on these areas, I think is so important. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that. And then I'll see if we have any more questions and comments that are coming forward.
Hi, Christine. We do have a few written questions that I'll go ahead and read right now. So the first one is from Nicole Chang. She said, I want to echo the comments provided by Gracia from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. I think a great opportunity for what she has highlighted, working with under-resourced agencies for competitive dollars, would be the office hours you all have set aside. I believe CTC can take the initiative to reach out to these under-resourced communities. I look forward to discussing this further. And then we have one more from Peter Skinner. On the Formulaic program, we found some minor issues with performance measurement when it comes to applying for certain types of transit projects, such as vehicle replacements. The CalBC model doesn't really work well with these types of projects, and perhaps it would be good to consider some alternative performance measurement tools to better capture benefits of transit projects that don't involve new routes or service expansion projects. That's it for written comments right now.
Thank you both for those comments. Yes. So I would say that in terms of the of reaching out to the agencies, that's really where the office hour concepts kind of come from, to kind of provide that technical assistance, to let the agencies know first about the program, because we need to really step back and say, okay, this is the local partnership program. This is what the intent of the program is, and really have those sessions to where they can ask us questions, and then talk about what their proposals are. So that and Anya's going to talk a little bit more about that. I know we talked about it in the kickoff workshop, but Anya's going to talk about that, and then we'll talk about it as we start getting closer to the time period of those sessions. And then for the second comment, yes, thank you for that comment, Peter. We will be looking at that again and having those discussions in terms of the Formulaic program. So thank you so much for those, and like I said, we want to make sure we're clarifying in areas that we need to clarify in terms of the guidelines. And so thank you for sharing those comments. Are there any other comments that we've received?
Not seeing any more, Christine, and not seeing any raised hands.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This is really, really, really good discussion. I appreciate it. So the next area, I'm going to turn it over to Anya, and she's going to go into her proposed 2022 program schedule.
Thank you, Christine. So Kayla, if you don't mind going to the next slide. As Christine said, I'm Anya Allenbacher, and I'm just gonna kind of walk you through our proposed program schedule. This has not changed from what was outlined in the kickoff workshop, but there are, as Christine said, there are two components to the LPP program, the competitive and formulaic. So we thought it was worth going over again, just in terms of those two different components. So for the draft guidelines, we're looking at presenting those to the commission in the summer of 2022, so next summer. And then the adoption of the guidelines and the call for projects will either be the summer or fall of 2022. And then the applications would be due in the winter of 2022. So for the competitive and formulaic, that's where both of these schedules are the same. But then the program adoption for the competitive program will be potentially in the summer of 2023. And then for the formulaic program, it would be in the winter of 2023. So probably the beginning of the calendar year. I just wanted to point out those differences. And then for the formulaic program, I also want to say that the application due date and the program adoption date, I guess we were not releasing specific dates yet, but when we do, those will be for the initial program adoption. And we're not proposing to change the revolving acceptance of the project nominations and the project programming throughout the cycle like it is now. So this would just be for the initial programming to start off the 2022 program. So I'll just stop there and ask if there's any questions or any input on the schedule, and I'll just note or acknowledge the comment we had earlier requesting that there be at least a 3-month period between the call for projects and the application due dates. So Kayla or Justin, is there any?
Hi, Anya. Not seeing any written questions or raised hands right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we've kind of talked about this a little bit already. So if we can go to the next slide then. So the proposed programming cycle for the 2022 program. As Christine mentioned earlier, we are proposing moving to a 2-year cycle for both the competitive and the formulaic programs. And as was pointed out earlier, the programming years for a 2-year cycle would be fiscal years 2023-24 and 2024-25. For a 3-year cycle, it would be fiscal years 2023-24 through 2025-26. And then a 4-year cycle, we just thought we'd throw that one out there. It would be for fiscal years 2023-24 through 26-27. And I remember the comment from earlier about thinking about the STIP cycle, but I thought I'd just ask right now if there's any other questions or comments, or and specifically whether a 2-year cycle would work for the formulaic program or the competitive program. Yeah, I'll just see if there's any comments, Kayla.
Nothing yet. I'm not seeing any written, and so far no hands raised.
Okay. All right. So let's go to the next slide then. And then if there's any questions or comments moving forward, please feel free to raise your hand, and we can always, we're happy to take comments on either the schedule or the programming cycles later on. The office hour sessions came up, and I'll just reiterate kind of what we went over in the kickoff workshop. So as some of you know, we're planning office hours prior to the call for projects, so that interested stakeholders can have an opportunity to meet with CTC staff to discuss specific projects. What we're envisioning is that stakeholders would ask technical questions about proposed projects and application-related questions during these office hours. Because once the call for projects is released, we can't discuss specific projects with stakeholders anymore or potential applicants. So the office hours are really a time where anyone who's interested in presenting and reviewing their projects with staff can have that time. So we're planning to schedule the office hours between February and April of next year, 2022. We're still working on the specifics, but the idea is that stakeholders will schedule time with staff, and then each scheduled office hour will be a closed session with those stakeholders and with the staff. And we're looking at an online scheduler tool right now, but we'll release the details on how to request office hours once we get closer to the actual schedule dates. So for now, we're planning on holding 2 sessions per month. and we will schedule them on a first come first served basis. But I just wanted to throw out there that that's our plan right now, but Christine and I have talked about it, and if there's need to be flexible, I think that's something that we'll definitely be able to consider. And then I'll just reiterate that these office hour sessions are not meant for guideline development topic discussions. It's really just meant for specific discussing specific projects. I'll just ask if there's any questions or comments about or additional comments, I should say, about the office hours.
We have one comment that just came in from Peter Skinner, and he said that the office hours sessions sound like a great idea. Not seeing any more hands raised though, so I think that's it for now. Oh, we do have a hand raised. I'm sorry. I'll turn it over to Justin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we have Mike Garabedian. Mike, you're free to unmute yourself and make a comment.
Thank you. Mike Garabedian at Placer County Tomorrow. Is there, and if there is, a role of the public in the office hours? Could you describe that, either when you're getting presentations or discussing projects, or to discuss the public views and ideas, or something like that?
So the office hours, the way that we've been thinking about them is that they would be closed sessions, and so the public would not be able to join the sessions, and it would really be between the applicant, the potential applicant, and CTC staff to discuss the project. And some of the topics that we envision might come up are, is this a good project for this program? Things like that.
And I guess I also want to add to that, although we have the office hour concepts, if there's any time to where there were more general local partnership program questions in terms of the program itself, we're always open to have those meetings with any interested stakeholders that would just want to learn more about the program. So that's always an open, that's something always open.
Well, good, thank you. And maybe before it's over, I'd like to go back to the question of a little bit about community involvement that was discussed earlier.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other attendees with their hand raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. So can we move to the next slide, please?
Yeah, Anya, 1 second. We did just receive a written question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
This is from Nicole Chang. She said, I appreciate the staff's willingness to be flexible. I am wondering if there is another chance to talk about this later. Is it too late to change by the time that you present?
So I'm assuming, is it too late to change the project by the time you present? If that's the question, then the answer is no, it's not too late to change, because these sessions would be happening before the application, or before the application deadline, and before the call for projects. So if I understood that question wrong, incorrectly, please let me know.
So it looks like she was referring to the structure of the office hours. That was her clarifying comment that she sent us.
Oh, okay. Christine, do you want to address that?
So I guess I would put it back on her. Is there something that she would like to propose, or in terms of how the concept of the office hour sessions are?
Nicole,
looks like we have a hand raised.
Yeah, we have, it looks like she's on here, so I'll go ahead and
Okay.
unmute her, Justin.
Okay, thank you.
So Nicole, you should be able, oops, I'm sorry. There we go. You should be able to unmute yourself now and speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you again for your willingness to be flexible. I don't think I have an idea yet, but I think I was thinking like if like the communities, the community resources that Leadership Council was talking about, just like reaching out to the under-resourced organizations, they likely won't have like the same kind of time slots as you all, and or resources to schedule the or like block out time. So I'm wondering if like it's like you reach out to these under-resourced organizations specifically, or there's just a way for these resources or these organizations to actually have time to meet with you all to get their projects and needs kind of addressed.
I do have a question. So when you talk of the under-resourced communities or agencies, so are you referring to a specific project that you want us to meet with the underserved communities, and if so, is there a list of the communities that you have that you feel we should reach out to? Because we want to make sure that we understand the intent behind us reaching out, and are there some examples or something you can share with us, and maybe we can have a further discussion, offline, or schedule something so we can understand a little bit more as to the underserved communities and what type of sessions are you that you envision us having with these communities?
Yeah, I think an offline kind of discussion would be great, and I could reach out to you all. I don't think I have a list in mind, but I feel like the Climate Plan Network and partners would definitely be able to produce a list for you if it results in these kind of projects being able to schedule time with you all.
Okay, and so at the end of the workshop, we have our contact information. I'd be happy to provide you that information, and we can have that discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Christine, if I may, that what I said earlier about our flexibility, I think if an agency is not able to meet during business hours, I think that's something that we could definitely discuss and see, if there's something that can be worked out that works for these agencies. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as well. So Kayla, I'll just ask, are there any other questions or comment?
Hi, Anya. No more questions, and I'm not seeing any more hands raised at the moment.
Okay, great. So let's move on to the next slide, and then moving forward, if there's any other questions on these, we'll be happy to, or comments, we'll be happy to take those. So what I wanted to do is kind of go over some general guideline changes. Later on in this workshop today, Christine will review the key topic areas that we had thought of discussing with you in upcoming workshops. And I think a lot of those were already brought up. But I wanted to go over just some general updates that we're also thinking about to help streamline not just the guideline document, but also the information that it contains. And Kayla, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I'll go through these bullet points briefly. And then afterwards, I'll invite input on all of the points and questions and comments, and instead of stopping in between, just to kind of help move things forward. So, so the first item that we wanted to kind of bring up as food for thought is separating the guidelines. And what we mean by that is separating out the competitive and formulaic guidelines into two separate documents. So because the competitive and formulaic programs have some aspects that obviously set them apart, we wanted to ask you, our stakeholders, whether it would be easier for you if the competitive and formulaic program guidelines were separated into their own documents. I just wanted to point out one upside that we see for separating them is that it would provide dedicated guidelines for referencing the policies and resources for the specific component, the competitive or formulaic part of the local partnership program. However, on the other hand, one reason to keep them together is that there is a lot of information that's the same for both the competitive and formulaic programs. For example, the establishing legislation, some of the policies are the same. For example, the eligible projects are the same in the competitive and formulaic. But we just wanted to put it out there. So the next item is the formatting changes. There are several areas of the current guidelines that we think would benefit from reformatting. And as we build consensus around some of the key topic areas in these upcoming workshops, we will be looking at the general flow of the guidelines and how to make the information more accessible. We're also thinking about the guidelines from the point of view of a variety of stakeholders and how to format them so that they make sense and flow for everybody who's referencing them, whether they be new to the program or our veteran applicants. The next item is clarifying language. So some sections of the guidelines, we feel that they have unclear language for existing policies. And some stakeholders have found that interpreting the policies are challenging. We want to clarify language and in general, just make sure that we're using plain language throughout. So for example, a new agency reading the guidelines should clearly be able to identify whether they're eligible for the program and also easily find that section. We do understand that there will always be questions and we welcome those, but this is just an effort to clarify what is in there. And then consistency with the other SB1 programs. As all the SB1 program workshops progress and as consensus is formed on issues in each of the programs, we will start formulating some of the guideline updates for stakeholders to look at and ensure that the same or similar policies are reflected consistently in all of our program guidelines. Okay, and then, so that's kind of my brief overview. I'll stop here and ask for questions and input. What we're really interested in hearing feedback on is any of these areas that I covered, but we also hope that you'll identify areas or sections of the guidelines that you have struggled to interpret and that you think we should be looking at more closely. So, you know, we already heard that the project cost savings section is one section that we need to clarify. So if there's any more out there, now that you've had a little bit of time to consider it, maybe flip through the guidelines, we'd love to hear that. And I'll just invite to that if anything comes up after this, you know, I hope that you'll get in touch and let us know, or maybe bring it up in future workshops. So Kayla or Justin, if there's any.
Hi, Anya. Yeah, so we did have a comment from Jose Luis saying that he supported the use of plain language. We also received a comment from Sarkis saying that, yes, separating the guidelines does make sense to clarify. We received one more comment in support from Adrian Cardozo. OCTA supports working towards separate guidelines for formula and competitive. Right now, that looks like all we have for written. We do have a general question regarding formulaic and competitive that came in from Kansas McGon from Placer County. They asked, what are some of the differences in formulaic versus competitive application and project requirements?
Yeah, so the eligibility criteria for the formulaic and competitive programs are different. For the formulaic program, in order to be eligible, and a jurisdiction or taxing authority has to have a voter approved measure, tax, toll, or fee, where the revenues are dedicated solely towards to transportation. And then for the competitive program, obviously the voter approved, those with voter approved measures, tax, tolls, or fees are eligible for competitive, but then also those with imposed fees are also eligible for the competitive program. And then the project nominations are mostly the same, but there are some differences. I think the competitive project nominations are a little bit more involved and ask for a lot more information. And I don't know, Christine, do you want to jump in with some more points?
Yeah, I would just say that the competitive program is like Anya said, a little bit more in depth when it comes in terms of the project nomination forms. So you're looking at with the formulaic forms, there are the electronic the application itself, the electronic project programming request form. In the current cycle, we do request for the performance metrics that tie into the project. We do want to see the benefits for the formulaic program projects. For the competitive, it's a little bit more involved. So you have the nominations, you have areas where there's a screening criteria where you need to meet. There's documents there. There's also documents that you have to submit from a qualitative and a quantitative standpoint in terms of the performance metrics, in terms of demonstrating those evaluation criteria areas. So there's a lot more in-depth information that's requested for the competitive program. So those are the areas that mainly differ. And another area that I can kind of think about off the top of my head is that the amendments. So with the amendments for the formulaic, they both have different both have processes, but with the competitive program, because that project is evaluated, we're really looking at is that amendment making changes to the scope, to the benefits, to the outputs of that project. And so that's really something that when it comes time for amendments in terms of the schedule, the cost, the scope, it's a little bit more involved with the competitive program projects as opposed to the formulaic program projects. But keep in mind that at the end of the day, the accountability is with both programs. So.
No more written questions right now, Anya, and I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Okay. Great. Well, then I will turn it back to you, Christine, to continue.
Thanks, Anya. So we're gonna take a brief pause. And so in case we have any questions or comments before I move forward with the discussion workshop format and structure. So I'll give it a couple of seconds, Kayla, in case something comes through. Any
Nothing
written
right
questions?
now.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, so we'll jump into the discussion, workshop format and structure. So Kayla, can you go to the next slide? So this is something that we talked about in the kickoff workshop that we had in August, kind of the format of the workshops. So we are just wanted to kind of give you a high level of the formatting. So the workshop agendas will be posted, maybe posted up to 10 calendar days before each workshop. So we will make every attempt to post the workshop agendas. As you see, we posted the first workshop, the September workshop. We send out a save the date, and we posted the workshop 10 days prior to the actual workshop to allow the interested attendees to kind of get a view of what we are planning on discussing in those workshops. The workshop presentations and recordings, I believe someone had requested the presentation. So these will be posted after each workshop to give you kind of some background of what was discussed in these workshops, and then the recording to kind of go along with the presentation. Staff will make recommendations based on the consensus that's reached over the course of about 2 workshops. So we really want to make sure that if there's a consensus reached and we've gotten to a place to where we can move forward with topics, we want to make sure that we are really using those workshops meaningfully and getting the most we can out of these workshops. So if there is a recommendation that's made, we want to make sure that we kind of move forward with new topics in the workshops. And then I'll talk a little bit about the structure and how we're going to go about that in the next slide. The decisions made in the workshop will be shared with the group after the workshop. So we will provide kind of a workshop recap, and then we'll also go over those kind of at the beginning of the workshops on each of our subsequent workshops to kind of share what was, if there's something that maybe someone missed, they need more clarification, they didn't understand, we will share those with the group. We'll try to aim to limit additional time on any one topic. So we make sure that all the scheduled topics are covered in a given workshop. There are some workshop topics that may kind of take a little bit longer, and we understand that. And so there may be times where we'll have to carry over some of those topics to kind of really make sure that we're getting the full benefit of having those discussions, those workshop discussion topics. And then previously covered topics may not be addressed at subsequent workshops. So if we're at a place where we've built that consensus around those topics, we may not discuss those. However, there may be times where they're brought up, and again, we can really look at how we want to structure maybe a subsequent workshop to kind of build those into those workshops. Next slide, Kayla. So this is kind of our structure, and this is something that we are proposing. And I think that, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, we really want to provide the time and the dedication to these topics that are really important. And so with this workshop being the first workshop, we really wanted to look at the key topics that kind of cross both programs, the formulaic and competitive. And I know that we've kind of touched the surface on some of these, and so we will be going possibly more in depth in these topics. And so we'll make sure that we identify kind of what these workshops are going to be for, and we want to make sure that we do get those agendas out so you know exactly the flow of that workshop and what topics we're either going to carry over or that's going to kind of cross both programs. For our second and third workshop, which will be in October and November, we really want to focus specifically on the individual programs. I think this is, we think this is very important because there are some areas that will have further discussions in terms of the formulaic program, and there are going to be a lot of discussions geared towards the competitive program. So we really wanted to make use of that time to talk about the specific areas where it just really is specific to those programs. And then, as you know, as Anya mentioned, you know, I think it probably ties into the comment about separating the guidelines. You know, I think it just kind of carries over into the workshops and how we want to structure those workshops, really focusing on those programs. I think it's, you know, we think it's really important. Then that fourth workshop, which will be in December, will kind of carry over. We'll bring those topics that we had in the second and third and even the first workshop to where we can go back and revisit those topics that we just either didn't have enough time or we just really didn't build a consensus. And we want to put those back on the agenda to kind of talk about those before we move forward. And then also the key topics again. So we'll kind of go back to the structure that we have for the first workshop, which is looking at key topics that cross both programs. So I think that, yeah, this structure will again give it the time and the dedication that it needs for each program. But then also circling back to kind of regress and look and say, okay, did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish, and reevaluate in going into you know, our future workshops in 2022. So I wanted to keep in mind, make sure you're aware that, you know, the dates are subject to change, but for now we have tentative dates that are on the save the date announcement that's out there. And so we're going to try our best to kind of stick to those dates, because I know during these times, we want to make sure that we let the stakeholders know ahead of time the dates because of scheduling issues. And so we want to make sure that you know ahead of time the schedule. So if we do pose a date change, we want to make sure that we get that out to you ahead of time on these workshops. I also wanted to say that we, and I think I mentioned this too, that we will be providing a workshop recap at every workshop. So you can kind of see what we talked about. If there's time that we need to set, we will set some time during each workshop to kind of recap those discussions. And so we really want to make sure that, again, we want to bring forward those topics and really talk about them and make sure that we're really getting the feedback and the input that we need to move forward in that. So with that, I want to open it up for any comments pertaining to our workshop format and structure, any ideas that you can share with us. And I'm going to open it up to the group.
Hi, Christine. Not seeing any written comments or questions yet, and it doesn't look like anyone is raising their hand.
Okay, cool. All right, so we will go ahead and move on to our next topic, which is the key topics for subsequent workshops. And I'm going to have Kayla, can you go to the next slide? So these are some of the key topics that we have discussed that we want to bring forward in our workshops. Some will, again, cross with both of the programs. So for the match requirements, and I know this came up in one of the comments previously, we really want to reevaluate the match requirements. We want to clarify, you know, what requirements, and I think we had a comment about that, clarifying what we determine what funds would be required for match. We want to look at the project cost savings, specifically in the formulaic program funding. I think that comment came up a couple of times. So we are going to be looking at that topic more closely. The funding restrictions, so we will be bringing that forward more so with the competitive program in terms of the CEQA and NEPA completion, the timing of that. So that's one of the topics we'll be discussing in the competitive program. The evaluation criteria, and as I mentioned earlier, you know, although there's no specific strategies in CAPTI for LPP, we will be discussing how we're going to incorporate those strategies in terms of equity and community engagement and pro-housing, really to try to align with CAPTI and working with the other programs. We will be talking about the project nominations, clarifying and streamlining the forms for both the formulaic and the competitive, and seeing how we can, you know, make better use of those nomination forms and moving into the competitive program, you know, are we requesting the documents that we need? Are we requesting the correct information that's going to allow us to really look at this project as a whole? So we'll be looking at that. We'll be incorporating the performance metric guidebook. Hannah from the Trade Corridors program will be discussing further the performance metric guidebook when we start talking about that topic. And so we'll get more closely in depth, and we'll really go in depth into that. And then if there's other key topics that we, you know, receive today or receive as we move forward in our workshops, we will be putting those on the agenda as well. So so with that, I'm going to open that up to see if we have any comments or if there are any other key topics of discussion. I know like I said, we talked about the match requirements. We talked about the project cost savings. Are there any other areas that we should be looking at and areas we can put forward for our workshops of discussion? So I'm going to open it up to the group again.
Hi, Christine. We do have one written comment regarding the workshops. It's from Nicole Chang. She said, for workshop format, I really appreciate and want to highlight the workshop at the end where we reevaluate topics and see if the goals have been met. I also want to urge you all to have more opportunities to have decisions aside, to make decisions aside from the workshops.
Thank you so much for that comment.
It doesn't look like we have any hands raised right now, and that's it for written comments.
Okay, great. Okay, so I guess we're going to go to our next slide, and it looks as though we are at that questions and comments period again. So if there's any comments, any questions that we didn't cover that you'd like to share with us on any areas, please let's talk about those now.
Christine, it looks like we have some hands raised, so I'll turn it over to Justin.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Yes, up first we have Patricia Chen.
Hi, Patricia.
Hi, Christine, this is Patricia Chen from LA Metro, and I just wanted to say it looks like we're getting through our agenda a little bit quickly today, and I just wanted to say that is a really good sign about the program, that it's well managed, and of course we have things to explore and, you know, perfect over the next few months, but it's going well, and I just wanted to express that.
Thank you.
And to thank you because for your efforts on that.
Thank you. And it is definitely a team effort, the LPP team effort. Thank you so much.
All right, up next we have Mike Garabedian.
Hi, thank you. Mike Garabedian. Back when you were talking about the public counter, public involvement, and so forth, if this is referring to the applications needing to demonstrate public involvement, I wonder if you have ideas shaping about that, how would it be demonstrated or shown to be effective? Those just off the top of my head, but I wonder if you have some initial thinking about what you're doing with that, if I'm interpreting it right.
Yeah, so you are interpreting it correctly, yes. So, but I like I said, I think I had mentioned when we were talking about the underserved communities and projects and opening that up to have those discussions and maybe we can, like I said, have an offline discussion about your interpretation and making sure we're both clear on where we're headed in terms of the community engagement and what our roles are and what the community is seeing and just making sure that the communication is there and all parties are understanding the goal that we're trying to get to. So I you know, don't hesitate to reach out to us and we can have those discussions, even if it's, again, if it's just understanding the program and understanding our guidelines and just having those conversations, I think would be great. So thank you so much for your comments, and we can always have a further discussion offline on that.
Well, good. I look forward to that.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Kenneth Cao.
Hi, I think you called my name. This is Kenneth Cow with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. First, I did want to thank all of the team, Anya and Christine and Kayla, for putting this all together. I think this is really great information. I kind of was saving my comments all the way till the end. I think we'll have a lot more opportunity to chat about all of this, but I did want to say that I really do appreciate all the flexibility that we have in the formulaic program, and for that to continue. And I think overall for this, the kind of the schedule and timing, it looks fine. One thing that I did maybe want to bring up, and I think this is probably impacting all of the programs, so I might have to raise this at all of them, is kind of how agencies might coordinate the SB1 programs with the STIP programming. I know Adrienne from OCT had mentioned that we'd like to, do it kind of roughly at the same time, but there is still a timing mismatch where, the SB1 programs are in the earlier years and the STIP available capacity programming is in the later years, and kind of how we might need to, figure out how to align those a little bit better. So that's something that maybe we could talk about in future workshops. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kenny.
Christine, I see no other attendees with their hand raised at this time.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Do we have any other comments, Kayla?
Hi, Christine. No, we have no more written comments.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. So moving on to the next slide, and I believe it's our closing. So I'm going to turn it over to Anya and Kayla, and they're going to give us our discussion recap and talk a little bit about our next workshop day. So Anya and Kayla?
Yes. So just thought I'd kind of go over some of the things we heard today, and I'll just invite Christine to jump in as she might. So thank you all for your comments, first of all, and your questions. This is all really valuable for us. We really, I've actually been looking forward to this workshop specifically, just to kind of hear from all of you and to hear where your thoughts are at on the LPP program, and how we can work together to really bring it to the next level, so to speak. With the programming cycle, what I heard is that we really want to look at aligning it with the STIP capacity and kind of decide on the cycle length and in terms of that, to take that into consideration, not just for LPP, as Kenny said, but for all the SB1 programs. For the program schedule, to really keep in mind that we allow enough time between the call for projects and the adoption, or the the call for projects and the application deadline, to allow for at least 3 months, if not more, between those deadlines. Working on really bringing the equity aspect and the CAPTI, some of the CAPTI goals into the LPP program, and kind of bringing those to the forefront as we may, and really having some great discussions around that. I'm looking forward to that. And then in terms of the evaluation criteria for the competitive program, not only looking at the evaluation criteria, but also thinking about the screening criteria and how we can support different types of projects, especially in underserved communities. And then, let's see. Thinking about we heard from Louis So in terms of thinking about delivery times for projects and thinking about how we can allow projects that don't fit into some of the timely use of funds projects to still be able to compete in our programs. And let's see. And then also looking at kind of calling out, especially in the formulaic parts of the guidelines, some of performance metrics alternatives for transit projects, and also some of the other just kind of calling out transit projects and some of the special things surrounding those types of projects so that they fit better into the program and the project nominations. And that was kind of what I had in terms of high level notes, but Christine, I don't know if you want to jump in with some other thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that you summed it up good. I think the only thing I would add is the comment, I believe it was Louis, when it talks about coordinating with the agencies in terms of just delivering the projects and the challenges that they're having with the rail companies and the agencies. And so yes, that's something that I will go back and have that discussion, and hopefully we'll have something that we can kind of provide in the next workshop in terms of that, and what coordinating efforts are being made behind the scenes and for those projects. So yeah, but no, you pretty much summed it up. Anya, thank you so much for that. So if we have no questions are coming through, I'm going to turn it over to Kayla, and she'll talk a little bit about our next workshop, and then how we'll be the save the date announcement, and then our workshop agenda. So Kayla?
Yeah, so we don't have any questions or comments to get to right now. It doesn't look like any raised hands. So I'll talk about our next workshop date. That's going to be on Tuesday, October 19th from 1 to 4 p.m. So same time, also via GoToWebinar. The save the date for that with the registration link for GoToWebinar will be out in just a couple of weeks. So again, that registration link is not available yet. You'll have to keep your eye out for the save the date announcement. And those can also be found on our workshops page on the Commission website. All the information is on that page for the other SB1 program workshops also. And the agenda for the workshop will be posted prior to the workshop. Again, that will go out before. So just keep your eye via email or on that workshops page on the Commission website.
Thank you, Kayla. So with that, then the next slide. So that just kind of wraps us up today. I want to thank you again so much. This has been a really good discussion. A lot of good comments, good feedback, and we really appreciate it. Like Anya mentioned, we were really excited about our first workshop. And so, hearing some familiar voices and hearing some new voices, I think it's great. We're going to go into this, with some good discussions, I believe. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be great this cycle. And so I know that when you leave a workshop, you always have those burning questions or comments that come after the workshop. So these are the areas you can send an email to the LPP LPP email. Please visit our Commission's website for the latest updates. Follow us on Twitter, on Facebook. So we're the social media. We have everything. So continue to keep us there, so you can keep up on all the announcements. And then here's our contact information. My email, my telephone number, as well as Anya's and Kayla's. If there are any questions that you want to reach directly, I know we've mentioned some conversations that we can have offline. If you reach out to us, we can schedule some meetings to have those offline conversations. And And then also we've placed our deputy director, Matthew Yoscott. His information is there if you wanted to reach out to him. But I am looking forward to those conversations, looking forward to having, sharing the information, providing more information about our program. And, you know, and I always go back to I always look at that partnership word, partnership. We want to make sure that we're really creating these partnerships. And the last cycle, it was a new cycle for me, and I really was able to really build those partnerships, and I really want to continue to do that. We have a good team that's working towards that, and I just want to keep that up. So thank you so much. And I'm going to see if Matthew Yoscott has some closing words that he'd like to share.
Thanks, Christine, and great job to you, Anya and Kayla. I wanted to reiterate one point that you all made earlier, which is different than something I mentioned in the all staff or the all program kickoff, which is that we will be posting recordings of these workshops moving forward onto the Commission's YouTube site. Back in August, we said that we were planning not to do that. We did get some comments saying that that would be a helpful tool for stakeholders that couldn't participate. And so we've heard those comments, and we will turn and post the recordings. And so with that, I will say, and Christine, I think, covered this pretty well. You know, functioning in the virtual environment is quite different for our staff this cycle than it was in cycle 2. We're going to be conducting several workshops over the next several months, and not just for the SB1 competitive programs, but I know that the active transport program will be having workshops. The local streets and roads program will have some workshops. And so on and so forth. So we know it's a lot to keep up with. We want to be accessible and available to stakeholders, whether they are applicants or members of the public. And so just kind of underscoring what Christine just said, if you do have an opportunity to you know, take a look at the guidelines and you have suggestions, or you get a chance to watch a workshop via recording if you weren't able to participate. We do accept all comments in writing, but we still encourage active participation in the workshop setting. We do think it's very important to discuss the ideas and the changes made to these programs because we agree and understand that these programs impact several different parts of the state, several different communities. And so we think it's quite important to have the discussion in this setting if we can, and hopefully eventually moving to a hybrid in-person virtual platform before the end of this workshop development cycle. But I'll just leave it at that. I appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. Christine, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. So if there's no other questions or comments, I'll just say thank you so much. Stay safe and hope to see you virtually in October. Thank you so much.